World War II was a massive global war. It lasted from 1939 to 1945. More countries were involved than in any other war in history. It was a conflict that truly touched every corner of our planet, from the bustling cities of Europe to the remote islands of the Pacific. We call it a world war because it wasn't just fought between a few nations, it pulled in people from all continents. The fighting was incredibly destructive. It changed the world map and the lives of millions of people forever. Understanding this war is like looking back at a huge, defining moment for all of humanity. A time of great struggle but also incredible stories of bravery. The war didn't just appear out of nowhere. To understand why it began, we have to look back to the end of World War I. That war ended in 1918, but it left many problems unsolved. Germany, having lost, was forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles. This treaty was very harsh. It made Germany pay a lot of money and accept all the blame for the First War. This made many German people very angry and poor. This feeling of unfairness created fertile ground for new, dangerous ideas to grow, setting the stage for another, even bigger conflict just 2 decades later. In the 1930s, a powerful leader named Adolf Hitler rose to power in Germany. He was the leader of the Nazi Party. Hitler promised to make Germany strong again. He ignored the Treaty of Versailles and started to build up Germany's army. He also had dangerous ideas about race and wanted to expand Germany's territory, creating what he called living space for the German people. His ambitions were not secret, and other countries in Europe watched with growing concern. They hoped to avoid another terrible war, but Hitler's aggression made that hope fade with each passing year. The final trigger for the war came on September 1, 1939. On that day, Hitler's powerful German army invaded Poland. This was a clear act of aggression that could not be ignored. Britain and France had promised to protect Poland if it was attacked. They gave Hitler a deadline to pull his troops out. He refused. As a result, 2 days later, on September 3, 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany. This was the moment the conflict became a full-blown European war, which would soon spread and engulf the entire globe in flames. The countries that fought in World War II were divided into 2 main groups. These groups were called the Axis powers and the Allied powers. The main Axis powers were Germany, Italy, and Japan. They signed agreements to support each other. Their goal was to expand their empires and gain control over large parts of the world. Germany wanted to dominate Europe, Italy wanted to control the Mediterranean, and Japan sought to build a vast empire in Asia and the Pacific. These 3 nations formed a powerful alliance that presented a massive challenge to the rest of the world. Each of the main countries had a strong, well-known leader. In Germany, Adolf Hitler was the dictator with total control. He was the driving force behind the war's start. In Italy, the fascist leader was Benito Mussolini, who was an ally of Hitler. Over in Japan, the country was led by Emperor Hirohito, but the military had a lot of power, with General Hideki Tojo serving as prime minister for much of the war. These men made the key decisions that led their nations down a path of conquest and destruction, shaping the course of the conflict from the very beginning. On the other side were the Allied powers, or the Allies. At the start, the main allies were Great Britain and France. But as the war continued, many more countries joined them. The most important additions were the Soviet Union, after it was invaded by Germany in 1941, and the United States, which joined the war after Japan attacked its naval base at Pearl Harbor in December 1941. This alliance brought together nations with very different political systems, but they shared a common goal: to stop the Axis powers and restore peace and freedom to the world. The leaders of the Allies are also very famous figures in history. Great Britain was led by the determined Prime Minister Winston Churchill, whose speeches inspired the British people to never give up. The President of the United States was Franklin D. Roosevelt, who led his country through most of the war until his death in 1945. In the Soviet Union, the powerful and ruthless leader was Joseph Stalin. These 3 men, known as the Big Three, often met to plan the war strategy and decide how the world would be shaped after the fighting finally stopped. The war was fought on many fronts and had several key moments that changed its direction. One of the first major events was the Battle of Britain in 1940. After conquering France, Hitler planned to invade Great Britain. But first, he needed to control the skies. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, fought against Britain's Royal Air Force. Despite being outnumbered, the brave RAF pilots successfully defended their country. This victory was crucial. It was Hitler's first major defeat, and it showed that the Axis powers were not invincible, giving hope to people across occupied Europe. Another huge turning point occurred on the Eastern Front. In June 1941, Hitler made a massive mistake. He invaded the Soviet Union. The German army pushed deep into the country, all the way to the city of Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad, which lasted from 1942 to 1943, was one of the bloodiest battles in human history. The Soviet army and citizens fought fiercely to defend the city. In the end, they surrounded and defeated the German army. This victory was a disaster for Hitler, and marked the beginning of Germany's long retreat from the east. In the Pacific, the war changed dramatically on December 7, 1941. Japan launched a surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. This attack brought the United States, a powerful industrial nation, into the war. 6 months later, the U.S. Navy won a decisive victory against the Japanese fleet at the Battle of Midway. This battle crippled the Japanese Navy, and they were never able to recover fully. From that point on, the Allies, led by the U.S., began the long and difficult task of pushing the Japanese forces back across the Pacific Ocean. During the war, life for ordinary people changed completely. In cities, people lived in constant fear of air raids. They used blackout curtains to hide the lights in their homes at night, so enemy bombers couldn't see their targets. Children were often sent away from the big cities to live in the countryside for safety. Food and other essential goods were rationed, meaning each family was only allowed to buy a small amount. Everyone had a ration book with coupons for things like meat, sugar, and gasoline. Life was hard, and everyone had to make sacrifices for the war effort. By 1944, the tide had turned firmly in favor of the Allies. On June 6, 1944, a day we now call D-Day, the Allies launched the largest sea invasion in history. Thousands of ships and soldiers landed on the beaches of Normandy in France. This created a new front in Western Europe and was the beginning of the end for Hitler's Germany. Allied forces fought their way through France and pushed towards Germany from the west, while the Soviet army advanced from the east. The pressure on Germany was now coming from all sides, squeezing its armies in a giant pincer movement. The war in Europe finally came to an end in the spring of 1945. As Allied troops closed in on the German capital, Berlin, Adolf Hitler took his own life on April 30th. A few days later, on May 8, 1945, Germany officially surrendered. This day is celebrated as Victory in Europe Day, or VE Day. There were huge celebrations in the streets of London, Paris, and Moscow. But even though the fighting in Europe was over, the war was not. The fight against Japan in the Pacific continued, and it was still costing many lives on both sides. The war against Japan ended a few months later. To avoid a costly invasion of Japan, the United States made a difficult decision. In August 1945, it dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The destruction was immense and horrifying. A few days after the second bomb, Japan announced its surrender on August 15, 1945. The formal surrender was signed on September 2nd, officially ending World War II. The world was finally at peace, but it was a very different world from the one that had existed just 6 years earlier. The impact of World War II is still felt very strongly today. The war caused the deaths of over 60 million people, making it the deadliest conflict in human history. Cities were destroyed and economies were shattered. After the war, world leaders wanted to make sure such a terrible conflict could never happen again. They created the United Nations, an organization where countries can work together to solve problems peacefully. The war also led to the end of colonial empires and the rise of 2 new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Remembering World War II teaches us about the terrible cost of war and the importance of working for peace.